Welcome back to the Pageant Project, guys. My next guest is Alexis Abrams, is competing for Miss California United States 2025. She's an award-winning actress who has recently been on Netflix with Tom Segura and stars in a romantic comedy written by Lloyd Schwartz of the Brady Bunch. I think everyone knows that. Alexis is a survivor of domestic violence, which was a catalyst for her platform and nonprofit, the Rise and Renew Foundation, where she helps supply resources to women who are struggling to leave domestic violence relationships. She's an athlete and loves to dance, play tennis, play soccer, and hike with her dog Rudy. And she's excited to see what role she takes on both on and off the screen. Well, Alexis, welcome to the show.
Thank you for
How is
having
your
me.
finger after having it broken by Tom Segura?
Uh,
Have you
my
recovered?
finger, my finger is fine. They're all here. They're all recovered. That was funny because we had shot the show so long ago that I forgot that happened, and so watching it back was jarring.
Uh, So I was telling Alexis before we jumped on live, I've done a lot of things to research interviews, but this is the first time I watched someone on Netflix get her finger broken, get thrown on the floor, and then have a knife thrown through her head. So obviously it's not real. I don't think I need to say that. Otherwise, you've recovered remarkably well. But there are a lot of pageant girls, I'm sure you know this, who also want to become actresses. And sometimes they were actresses first and then looked at pageantry and went, oh, that's interesting. I'll do that too.
Mhm.
Most of them, if not all, I think you're the first one I've interviewed who's made it onto Netflix, which is a huge achievement in and of
Thank
itself.
you.
So well done for that. Can you give people watching just an idea as to how much work? Because the scene that you were in was maybe 5 minutes long from beginning to end, if
Give or
I'm not
take.
mistaken.
Correct.
How much actual work goes into that to make that 5 minute scene?
Oh, that's such a loaded question because there was so much work to just getting myself to the point of having that audition and then booking the job. And then on set, which I think is what you're asking about, it was 3 days for myself. I
Wow.
had a stunt double who it was absolutely incredible. And there was a fitting and a stunt rehearsal because it was such a stunt heavy scene. And then it was a lot of effects in post production. But for me, it was years of work and training to be able to get the audition and do well enough to book the job. And then on set, it was 3 days that were very intense. They were so much fun. And then, years of waiting to see it on screen.
Let's go into the on-set version and then I what happened on set, and then I do want to ask you about the longer journey because I've always thought after doing so many interviews, the people who are best at dealing with rejection probably are actors. Because
Mm-hmm.
just hearing people like other actors, there's a lot of podcasts now hosted by actors, and they will talk about how many auditions they've had and how brutal it is. You can, be rejected and no idea why. You can be
Mm-hmm.
rejected and you can be told you got the part and then you don't have the part because they wanted someone else all of a sudden and you again don't know why. But we'll go into that in a sec. But just in terms of on set, you said it was 3 days. Can you
Mm-hmm.
I'll get you to describe the scene just briefly for people who haven't seen it, because I think you can do a better job of describing it than I can, because you were
Okay.
there.
I was. So it begins innocent enough, and I am a barista taking a coffee order, maybe with a little bit of attitude, and then the scene escalates in ways that I don't want to give away, but it escalates a lot and very rapidly, and then I jump onto Tom Segura's back and attack him. He retaliates, and I end up with a knife in the back of my head.
Just another day in the life of a barista. It was just looking at like the subtext of I don't know, that's such a weird word for me to use. I'm not going to use that. But just
Okay.
looking at it in terms of, because you got Tom, he orders his beverage and he has like an addition to make, and there's that old joke in the food industry that no one orders food anymore. They want to substitute everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, we won't spoil it, but you do have a bit of an attitude to the you have a certain look on your face. Let's describe it. But I think a lot of people can actually sympathize with that because I have no idea what it's like. So in terms, how did you feel about the writing of it? Because it's not just the comic and the action in the scene. There's also that little bit of commentary about society as well that's going on behind it.
Oh, of course. Well, it helped a lot that I had spent years before working in restaurants and lounges. And so I had worked in the service industry, and I know what it's like to have a long day and then customers maybe pushing your buttons, or maybe you're just not having your best day. And then you come in with that. And then it went up from there. But the writing is actually very interesting, because when I had went in for the audition, I went in for the role of barista. So I'm assuming it's under 5 lines. It's, "Hi, may I take your order? Thank you, next." And then I did the callback in person, and I met the director, who was absolutely lovely. And they go, "Do you do stunts?" I don't know why. So imagine my surprise. And I say, I have light stunt training, and I'm happy to try. And they go, "Okay." And then I learned that I booked the job, and then I see the full scene. So I think, as shocking as it is to see it and to watch it, I had a little bit of that just booking the job, because it was, oh, wow. And I didn't know when I had went in for the initial audition. So it was very surprising, but exciting. And I was happy to take on something so comedic, and I was going to say dramatic, but I don't think that that's the right word. Jarring.
I mean, it was pretty jarring is a good word to describe it. I'm going to assume that when you were working in the hospitality industry, that you didn't have quite that level of attitude to your customers, I hope. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't have gone well.
Otherwise, I don't think I would have continued working in hospitality.
That's fair. All right, so that's the show. I highly recommend people go and watch it on Netflix. It is very, very. You won't be bored by it one way or the other. I tuned in to watch Alexis's episode, and it opens with a very jarring visual. Let's leave it at that. It's probably not appropriate for a pageant interview. But as I said, I wanted to go back into the journey of an actor. Let's go back to the audition process for this specifically first. So what was that like? Are you able to divulge how long ago it was, and then how long the process actually took, callbacks, etc., etc.?
I don't know if I could say how long it was ago.
Okay.
So we're going to skip that
That's
one.
fine.
But it was a pretty rapid process when we first did it. So the first round was a self-tape, and I shot that from my apartment. It was very simple. I sent it in. I had gotten that from my manager. And it was this casting director office that I had been going to for months. And I would always get callback or unavail, which means you just about almost booked it. So make sure that you're free and available, and you don't go and dye your hair or anything. So I was getting this all the time from this same office, and it wasn't booking anything, which, after a while gets frustrating. But you have to just look at the positive and say, hey, they like me. They keep calling me back.
Yeah.
They keep having me, on avail. I'm so close all the time. And then I got this one. I sent in the self-tape, and they wanted me for an in-person callback. So I go in. I was very comfortable in the office because I had been there so many times before, which I think was an asset. And then, I had a relationship with the casting director from these prior months, and then booked it in person. I found out maybe a few hours later or the next day. I remember my brother was visiting me in Los Angeles, and we were out to lunch, and I got the email, and I started crying. And I was so excited because so much work had went into booking this one thing. And then I believe the fitting and the rehearsal was 4 days to a week after that. And then we shot it maybe 2 days after the fitting and rehearsal. So the entire timeline of it was maybe 2 weeks long total.
Yeah.
Very fast.
So it's quite, well, once it happens, it happens very quickly. You mentioned you got the email and you started crying. Did your brother know why did you just start bawling? And he's like, what's going on with her? Okay.
My brother has been one of my greatest supporters, so he was so happy for me. Maybe he shed a tear too. I don't really remember, but he knew.
You probably couldn't see through the tears you were shedding. I do want to ask, run me through, because I often ask people who've won a pageant title what the emotions are like when they realize they've won, and obviously there's a lot of tears there too. For yourself, when you got that email, and then also the emotions of when the show dropped and you get to share it with your friends and you see yourself on Netflix, which in this day and age, okay, maybe it's not a feature film, but for a lot of people, Netflix is what they watch more now. There's a lot to be said about, how Netflix and streaming services have affected, Hollywood, so to say. Run us through what the emotions are like when you get the email and, you've made it, in inverted commas. I'm sure you didn't think of it like that, but it's a big step. And then also the emotions of when you see yourself on Netflix. What was that like?
I'm having the exact feelings right now as you say
Yeah.
that. It's like your heart leaps out of your chest, but it also feels like a weight is lifted off your shoulders because you had
Mm.
put in all this work and it finally paid off. So
Yeah.
there's this feeling of relief that is so great because you're working so hard towards something for so long and then you see the result of it. And so it's not a check mark and checking a box because you always want to do more and keep setting
Yeah.
goals and going for more. But it is in a way
Mm.
it's a marking of all of the work that you had put in. So it's this feeling of relief and such pride and happiness. And it did kind of feel like I made it in that moment because that was such a huge goal of mine
Yeah.
that I had accomplished. And then, you wait a long time and see it come out, which was just a few weeks ago. And I had that same feeling of I did it. This is
Mm.
incredible. I grew up in a small town in Connecticut. And so I didn't know anybody in the entertainment industry. And I had come to Hollywood despite people telling me that I probably wouldn't do well here. And so it was this feeling of so much pride in myself and in my work ethic, which is really what I have to thank for it. And luck and timing always play a part in it too, but it was so much. I was just proud of myself and relieved that it had happened.
Is the relief partly because, as you mentioned, I think you have people doubting you, and I think a lot of the time, the doubt can, not always, but can be well-meaning because people obviously want to see you. Well, I mean, your friends want to see you do well, and I got to imagine that young girl going to Hollywood trying to make it is borderline cliche, right? And so a lot of people are like, oh, don't
Mm-hmm.
do that, you'll never make it. What are you going to do to pay your way, etc., etc. Was a relief partly because it felt like all that hard work that you put in, and we'll get into that, it was worth it. It did pay off. And so that was a sort of the weight off your shoulders, so to speak.
I think so. I think the relief, and all of the people who said that I shouldn't do it, I think that they had my best intentions at heart. I don't think that it
Yeah.
was ever from a malicious place. It was, this, a lot of people do this, and unfortunately, it doesn't work. And we want you to live a happy, healthy, fulfilling life. And we just don't know if this is the way to do so. So I never felt ill intent from the people saying that. But yeah, it goes into the back of your mind and you think, well, maybe I can't, but I'm going to try anyway. And I think that's my greatest strength is that I will always get up and I will always try. And I get knocked down and I did a lot pursuing acting and I continue to, but I will always get back up. And so I think the relief was, I did it despite
Yeah.
all of this and not knowing anybody. I still made it happen.
Did you celebrate at all? Did you take the time to celebrate at all when you got the email or when you saw the Netflix when it dropped? Did you have a viewing party or I mean,
Oh,
you
of
must have
course.
celebrated. Okay.
Yes, I had a slice of cake for the premiere. Right when it came out at midnight, I had one in the fridge waiting, and I watched it, and I ate my cake and celebrated with my dog Rudy. And then a few days ago, my friend had also had a show come out, and that was their first time on streaming. So we had a
Wow.
dual streaming party with all of our friends, and it was so exciting to be able to celebrate myself, of course, but also my friend who I'm able to come up and grow with. So there was a lot of celebrations involved.
What was the what flavor of cake?
There's a berry cake and it's vanilla cake. It has blueberries and raspberries in the middle and then a whipped cream frosting. And it is the best thing that I've ever tasted in
Wow.
my life.
Wow. That sounds good. Okay, so let's reverse time a little bit. I want you to take us back to the moment that you decided that this was your goal, that you wanted to be a professional actress. And then can you walk us through, I'm sure you could speak for hours and hours about your journey, but if you can walk us through some of the highs and maybe some of the lows that have gotten you to where you are today, where you've been on Netflix. I mean, it's so impressive just to have on your resume, right? Because I don't think anyone's gotten to the point where you've gotten to without a lot of tumbles, a lot of falling over, and as you already said, getting back up. So, where did the journey start? And give us the overview or the plot synopsis, as I like to say with movies.
Of course. I wish I could tell you when it started, but I don't know. For as long as I can remember, I had wanted to be an actress. I remember it felt like a big deal when I was maybe 7 or 8 when I told that to my family, because we didn't know anybody who had done that. So that almost seems like a point in time when it became real and like I wanted to
Mm,
do that. But again, a small town in Connecticut, I could say that, but there wasn't much that I could do with it.
yeah.
And then I had went to an open call in New York City with my aunt years later. Maybe I was 12 or 13, and that was my first audition. And it was 2 blocks of young girls wrapped around the city to say one line in a movie. And it was exciting. So I kind of confirmed at that point that that was what I wanted to do. And then I definitely doubted myself, and I went to business school right after high school. And I failed out because I was always skipping classes to go to auditions. And so I said, well, this is my path and this is what I want to do. And clearly this is what I'm meant to do because this is what I'm pursuing. And
Yeah.
it's not school. So I spent some time in New York, and I was doing indie films there, or whoever would hire me, whatever I could act in. I was happy to get on set and just try it. And I kept getting good feedback from people. You're really great at this. And I think hearing that enough kind of confirmed, okay, you can do this, because there was so much doubt in the meantime, if I could. And so I was in New York and I was getting good feedback and I was booking these little things, and I had kind of built a community there. And then it seemed like it stalled out. So I didn't know if it was time to just hang it up. And that was all I would ever do. And I was proud of, the fact that I had been
Yeah.
in some films and I made it happen. Or if it was time to try Los Angeles. And that's what I
Mm,
did. And I got here, and shortly after, booked some commercials and booked that show. And it's a daily. Am I meant to do this? Yes, I am. I love it, and it's tough. And like you said, that I've been on countless auditions, and it's not even that you hear no; it's that you don't hear anything.
yeah.
And so that's frustrating because you don't know why. And then you feel like you've put your best performance and every life experience that you've had into something, and you send it into the abyss and you hear nothing. And maybe you'll see it on a billboard of a year later, and you'll see who booked it, and sometimes it's a star, or sometimes they're just different than you, but it's not hearing anything. It can get to you for a while. So it's just that constant reminder of, I love this, I want to do this. I've proven to myself that I can, and this is what I'm going to pursue. And it's a lot of self-talk. And I think it's the same thing with pageantry. There's a lot of obstacles, and you just have to keep affirming yourself because you know that that's where you're supposed to be.
It is eerily similar to pageantry, but it
Mm-hmm.
seems almost magnified because at pageants you don't have 2 blocks of girls lining up just for one line. Um, Talk to me about the importance of self-belief, because I have to imagine after getting, as you said, you don't even get a no. You get nothing, and
Mm-hmm.
that's worse because, and again with pageantry, sometimes you don't get your scores, you don't get feedback, and you don't win, and you have no, well, what am I going to work on? For me, I played a lot of sports, and if you get beat at sports, it's pretty. I mean, it's not good to lose. I don't like losing, but at least you can say, okay, I need to get faster, I need to get stronger, I need to get better at XYZ skill. But when you get no feedback, talk about the effect it can have on you, your self belief, your mental health. Because I got to imagine, unless you're just built differently, it's got to have an effect.
Oh, it absolutely has an effect. I think people who pursue acting are some of the strongest people that I've ever met, because you have to believe in yourself, and you have to be accountable for your own growth, which I think is
Mm,
important. So you're not getting any feedback, well then it's important to be able to take a look at yourself and just find areas on your own that you can improve in, and then want to go and do that. So it's a lot of that. It's a lot of self accountability, and it's just, you have to keep going. And sometimes it gets hard. I'm not going to lie to you, but when it gets hard, it's great to have a great support system and friends who are cheering you on, which is great to have a community. And you have to find it in yourself.
You sound like someone who has an incredible amount of self-belief and self-determination. I have to say that, though,
You
because it
have
sounds like
to.
it's not an industry. If you don't have that, the industry would eat you alive. But I mean, it's
Absolutely.
rare for me to talk to someone who seems to believe in herself so much, even though there's a lot of, I'm sure, as you said, there's a lot of falls, there's a lot of rejection.
Mm-hmm.
That sense of self-belief, have you always had that? Or did you have to sort of develop it in response to the realities of the industry?
I think a bit of both. I've always known that this is what I wanted to do. And so I knew I was going to be relentless in my pursuit of that. And that's something that I've always had. But I think I had a lot of people from the outside who were impacting me and making me doubt myself. And especially, I was in a relationship that was marked by domestic violence, and it almost made me give up on everything because it was outside influences making me think that I was unworthy. And so the hardest thing that I've ever done was leave that situation and restart my entire life. And since then, I've been, I think more, I've had more self belief than ever because I had to. And I had to rebuild my life from scratch. And I'm so proud of myself for doing that. And it was the first time in my life that I feel like I didn't have any outside influences on me. And I had to be accountable for my life, or frankly, it wasn't going to go anywhere. And so I knew what I wanted for myself, and I knew that I had to put in the work, and there really wasn't another option. So that's
Yeah.
what I did.
It's like they say, if you want to take the island, burn the boats. I've worked in the mental health field for a while. I wrote a book on it specifically about women's mental health, and I interviewed a few of them, and a few of them had been through domestic violent situations. And can I just say, as a man, to hear what they went through, it was. I mean, as much as we joked that the Netflix the episode you were in, it was jarring, but that's not real, right? Whereas the stories that these women were telling me, I'll give you an example. So there was one over in South Africa, and the man in question. So I was interviewing the woman. The man she was in a relationship at the time pulled a gun on her and fired at her head and just happened to miss. But I mean, I'm getting chills just thinking about it now because she said at that moment, that's when I thought I died. Obviously, if someone fires a gun directly at your head. And then she got out of that. There was another woman who I spoke to who had to jump off a balcony. And she went to pick up her bag. She couldn't, and she didn't realize why until she realized she had broken her wrist. And the only reason she managed to get away was because her partner at the time also jumped after her, but he broke his leg. And then she managed to run to a road, hailed down a car, but the car sped off because she was covered in blood. She'd been beaten unconscious. Sorry, I know this is very graphic. But they all say that the hardest thing to do with that is leaving.
Yes.
I also think at that moment of leaving is when you're most in danger. And the question they always get and the shame they deal with in terms of having to justify, it's like, why didn't you leave earlier? Like, you're smart. You should have known. You should have known better. You obviously very brave leaving the relationship and brave enough to talk about it. Can you just elaborate a little bit on how it's shaped you? Because I mean, I got to imagine leaving that, it's almost like you've got a new lease on life.
Absolutely. But that was, like I had said before, leaving was the hardest thing that I have ever had to do. First of all, it's not safe. And I didn't know that. So
Yeah,
I had left, and I had some legal help doing so, which thank God I did. But my mom called me after and she said, just so you know, you got a piece of paper. And I hope to God that protects you, but there is no guarantee because right now is when a lot of women lose their lives. So
yeah,
you need to be looking over your shoulder when you go out. You need to be with friends. You need to be so careful. And if you need to come home for a while, that is fine. We will take you with open
mm,
arms. And that was a hard conversation, but it was
yeah,
something that I didn't know. How would you if this hadn't been your life and you hadn't been around it before? Uh,
yeah,
and I think it was finding a lot of strength in myself and knowing I knew for so long that that wasn't the life that I wanted, but I
yeah,
hadn't seen a way to get out of it. I didn't
right.
know that there were resources. I didn't know what I would do with myself to make it on my own. Because when somebody is around you and they're criticizing you and making you question yourself for so long, you don't know how you're going to be on your own. So I didn't. And I didn't leave for far too long. And there are reasons, there are other reasons within that I didn't. And I wanted to support them and I loved them. And I think
Yeah.
that's so strange for people to hear. But when you have love for somebody, and domestic violence usually isn't something that starts overnight, because if it did, you would probably leave if you saw it early on enough. But it's something that it grows. And I don't know how far it would have gone.
Mm.
Mine, I think for me, peaked at his hands were around my neck and my vision started to blur. And I remember something that I had seen on TikTok, and this seems so silly that it was a TikTok video that might have saved my life, but it was. And so I think that advocating on social media is important, because I
Yeah.
remember I had seen that if somebody will put their hands around your neck, they're significantly more likely to end your life than any other act of violence.
Right.
And so and the next day, I had to deal with the bruises there, and I had to get an X-ray on my arm to see if it was broken or fractured.
Right.
Luckily, it wasn't. But I remember my mom. My mom is a nurse, and she
Mm.
always said that the hardest thing that she ever sees is when a parent has to bury their child before them. And so I said, I will never let that happen to you. And I had to keep my promise to her, because if I had stayed in that, I don't know, but it was possible that she would have had to bury me. And I couldn't allow that to happen. And I wanted so much more for myself. So I was kind of at a rock bottom being in this
Yeah.
relationship. And, you leave and you're not renewed. You're not, a fully
No.
thriving person. You're at this rock bottom, and you
Yeah.
have to build yourself back up. So when I say I restarted my entire life, that's completely true. And that was when I started pageantry. And I'm so glad that I did. And every time I fill out, a judge's bio sheet and I look at everything that I've done and everything that I've been through, I start to cry tears of joy, because I'm proud of myself. And that's a story that I want to share. And at first it was hard. And the more time that passes, it gets easier. But I think the story is too important to not share.
I agree. Talk to let the audience know. Obviously, you are passionate about advocating for domestic violence, and there's a lot of different angles in terms of, are you spreading awareness? Are you providing resources, etc.? I mean, you mentioned the TikTok video. Awareness is definitely a part of it. I remember learning that the domestic violence comes in many forms. It's not just physical,
Mm-hmm.
although obviously physical is there. There can be emotional. There's financial. There's all these different ways that a partner can try and control the other person, to the point where, and I don't know if this is accurate for yourself, but you feel like, if I leave, I'll be nobody, because that's kind of one of the issues. Is like, oh, they make you dependent on them, and they make you feel like, if you leave me, you'll be nobody. Like, no one will ever remember you. Everyone will forget you. In terms of what you've chosen to do with, I think it was your foundation, was it?
I have a nonprofit called the Rise and Renew Foundation, and it was
Right.
very much started because of that time when I left and when I wanted to leave, and I didn't know how dangerous it was. And
Mhm.
so I think that it's important for women to know how to leave safely, because
Yeah.
that's a caveat. Anybody can say, "Well, just leave." Well, he
Yeah.
can follow you. He can physically block you from leaving. That is something that I have experienced before. You can be in financial distress if it's a situation where maybe you're
Yeah.
dependent on them, or you're living together, and now you may be homeless. I mean, there's so much more that comes with leaving than the people who say just leave. And while I understand where they're coming from, I think that there's just a lot that people don't understand to it. So we try to just provide information on what safe leaving looks like, which is having a community, letting people know, perhaps involving the law and getting a restraining order, having something set up. We're also working on creating scholarship funds for women, so that if for instance, you were financially dependent on your partner, you can get an education after, and then you can provide for yourself, which is something that's, it's so hard to do when you leave and you have to restart your whole life. And the last thing that you want to think about is how you can pay for an education. So we're
Yeah.
just trying to make the transition a little simpler so that they can thrive after.
The area that you're at, are there are there resources for women who are attempting to leave domestic violence relationships? I know here, to give you an example, here in Australia, there are women's shelters. And so if they are leaving, in the process of leaving a domestically violent relationship, there are places where they can go to stay for free. I mean, especially if they have a young kid, that's even worse. And they're given, temporary shelter and sort of what you said about an education, or maybe to education with a view to a vocation. The issue with that is that obviously it's got to be funded somehow. And sometimes there's a time limit on how long the women are able to stay there. And frankly, there's more demand than there is supply, unfortunately. Yes. Do any resources like that exist as far as, in your local area?
Yes, we do have women's shelters here, but like you said, often the demand outweighs the supply of rooms and the time limit that the women have on there. It's something that is great if you need it to transition, and I'm so happy that it exists, but it's not the end answer that you need to get to.
Yeah.
So yes, they exist. I just think that there needs to be more that goes into helping women, and the transition to, even if you do find yourself in a shelter, the transition from getting out of there to going off on your own. I, for instance, volunteer at the Downtown Women's Center, which they don't sleep at, but women can come in, they can shower, they can eat, they can use the phone and internet. So it's a great resource. But again, there has to be so much more.
Can I ask you, and this is a difficult big picture question, but obviously this is an issue that as a society I would like to think we want to minimize or completely eliminate. So then the question is, well, how? And I don't know. It's one thing to say to a woman who's in a relationship, oh, you should have known better, just leave. And again, that's a gross oversimplification. It's not that easy, and very often you still love the person at the time that you leave them. Have you given any thought to how, and I'm sure you have, how can we reduce the incidence of it? As you said, like the women's shelters, it's almost like it's there, but I think it would be better if we, frankly, reduce the demand on it to not to joke about it, but if we reduce the incidence of domestic violence, that would also be a massive accomplishment. Have you given any thought to how, as a society, that we could do that?
I have. I've given that a lot of thought. And I think it comes in how we're raising children and how to respect women. I'm going to say women in this case because, men can be victims of domestic violence too, of course. Unfortunately, the instances of it happening to women outweigh men. So that's my focus at this point in time. And I think, we live in a society that doesn't respect women as much as they do with men. I think that we're raising children who perhaps feel entitled and like they can have what they want, and those effects grow and they can be harmful to people. So I think that the issue starts with the new generation and raising them to have values of kindness and empathy. And I think that's the only way that we would eventually, hopefully eradicate domestic violence. Because otherwise it's something it's far too prevalent, and it's something that needs to be stopped before it even starts.
Absolutely. I think we have a lot of work to do in that area, and I agree with you. It starts young. I mean, the younger you can tackle any problem, the better. I'm wondering, is there any, again, in the local area, is there any, because it's like, how can we help the younger generation grow up to be kinder and more respectful? And I know that in school very often we're teaching math, science, history, or whatever it is, and there seems to be very little room in the curriculum, frankly, to teach them some of these other things like values and stuff like that. And I often wonder, like, where are kids supposed to get that education from in this day and age? Because if they're getting them from social media, or they're getting them from, let's say, video games or things like that, very often those messages are mixed at best. Sometimes they can be downright toxic. I'm sure I don't need to tell you, there's a wealth of very toxic masculine sort of vibes on social media, and I look at them and go, you people are absolutely disgusting. But I don't know, as an older person, I look at them and go, obviously I can make a judgment. But when you're younger, you don't know. And sometimes you look up to these people because they have millions of followers. That's the world that we live in. You go, oh, this person must make sense, so I'm going to be like them. How can we get through to the younger generation with a message of kindness and respect for women?
I think it starts with everybody that they interact with. So that's parents at home, that's grandparents, and the more ingrained that is in somebody, that disrespect is okay, the harder it is to communicate otherwise to other generations. So I think it's also older generations holding themselves accountable and holding each other accountable and saying, "Hey, that wasn't right, and you need to learn from that and change your behavior because this younger generation is going to see it and replicate that." And that's not what we want for society at large. I also think, in schools, maybe there's not room for a kindness class in the curriculum, but it could be something that's so ingrained in the classrooms that it's natural for the teacher to approach with kindness and encourage kindness among the students. And then I think also a big part of it is holding, your peers accountable for what they do. So if a student is perhaps being unkind or disrespectful to another student, I would hope that through these values that have been around them through parents and grandparents and the teacher, that they would be comfortable calling that action out. And I don't think shaming people for it when they're at such a young age and they're still learning. I don't think that approaching anything with shame is going to be helpful or beneficial. But just we can use this as a learning moment, and we can do better. And that's okay. And next time you will do better. And we're going to make sure of it together. And if you don't know how, that's fine. You can ask me and I will help you.
It can be a, and this is by no means an excuse. It can be a very uncomfortable conversation, especially with it when it's with your peers, or let's say you see something that an older person is doing, maybe it's a parent or something like that, doing something that you just feel is not right. And sometimes their argument, I mean, they grew up in a different time period or whatnot, but even having that conversation when you have a peer and you see them doing something that you deeply disagree with, that conversation can be a very difficult one to have.
It can be, but I think that it's something that needs to be done. And that comes from inside yourself. You just
Mm,
need to know that, the bigger picture at large is more important than one uncomfortable conversation or two uncomfortable conversations. We have an entire generation to raise
yeah,
with kindness. And is that worth a few uncomfortable conversations? Absolutely.
yeah. Talk to me about pageantry. How smooth segue here. You did mention that very, very smooth. The domestic violent, leaving that relationship is what got you, I think, interested in pageantry.
Mhm.
But talk how did I mean? I got to imagine you got more than enough on your plate. I mean, why pageants?
Honestly, it was something that I had wanted to try since I was a kid, and it was another thing that my family just didn't know anybody who had done pageants, and so it was this foreign thing to us, and it wasn't something that I ever really thought I would pursue. And it was this far off thing that I had always admired. And, I saw the pretty dresses and the confident women, and they were so accomplished. And I had so much respect from them from afar. And then I left this relationship, and I honestly was at my rock bottom. And I said, well, who do I want to be? And I thought, oh, to simplify it, a pageant girl. And because they're just so, they lead with kindness, like we were just talking about, and they're giving and inspirational and confident, and that they know what they want and they will go and pursue it. And so I said, well, this is the first time in my life that nobody's telling me, no, you can't do that.
Yeah,
So I kind of have to do it now. And I did, and I signed up, and my first pageant was Miss California USA. And I got there, and I had no idea what to expect. I wanted to find out the beauty tips and tricks and wear the pretty dress and play pretend that I was a pageant girl for a weekend. And it ended up being one of the most impactful weekends of my life because of the other women who were there. And they had these great accomplishments, and they had these things that they were advocating for that were so important, and they were poised and beautiful and strong and everything that I had wanted to be my entire life. And they were kind. And so seeing that, I wanted to go back because I've heard this is pretty common, but I entered my first pageant thinking that it would be my one and only. And then I had such a good experience that I wanted to do it again and again. So here we are.
Yeah, we call it getting bit by the pageant bug. I
Mm-hmm.
also joke that I never believe any pageant girl when she says she's done or she's retired. I tell you, all a bunch of liars, because the number of people who said I'm done, and then like 5 months later, here they are entering another pageant. Can you describe what it was like meeting women like that? So obviously, I like, well, not obviously, I like saying one of the best things that comes out of pageantry. Forget the crown, forget who wins. It's the other women that you meet, because I think pageantry, it's like a moth to a flame to a very certain type, very specific type of woman. Someone who's driven, hungry, such as yourself, but someone who wants to give back beyond themselves as well. It's not just about me, me, me. Of course, in any field, you can meet people like that, right? But by and large, they are, as you said, very strong, very goal-driven, very ambitious, yet they lead with kindness. They lead with that respect.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you felt like you were surrounded by when you got to that pageant for the first time?
Oh, absolutely. And I didn't know if that would be the case because, never being in it and there's, I can think rumors surrounding pageantry when you're
Yeah.
so far outside of it that, the girls aren't friendly. And so I said, well, I guess I'm going to go see myself if that's true or not. And those rumors were so wrong. And I think
Yeah.
that the pageant girls that I have been around thus far have been the kindest people I have ever met. So driven and ambitious. And it was uplifting just to be around them. And
Yeah.
then to want to go down my own path to become not them, but my own version of what that
Yeah.
means for myself, to be confident and to give back and to lead with kindness. And so I pursued it. And I think just seeing that in other people starts your own self-growth journey. And the best
Yeah.
part of pageantry for me is that it forces you to become the best version of you that you're the most proud of.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, as an actress, you are tasked with, embodying different roles, as you mentioned, the stunt training and things like that. So I'm just wondering, when you walked into this pageant and you had no idea what was going to happen, what were some of the things that surprised you? Because it sounds like you just went in and went, well, let's see what happens. So what were some of the things you went, oh, I had no idea we were going to do that?
Everything. I didn't know. I didn't know that the girls would be so kind. That was a pleasant surprise. I had quite literally just entered and showed up. So
So you done
they
no
said
preparation, basically.
no, because I didn't know what to prepare for. So then I get there and some of the girls go, "Oh, what's your walking pattern?" And I said, "My what?" I thought you
I
just
can
walk.
walk.
What do you mean? And then a funny story about that. If you know pageants, you know that you should break in your pageant shoes. You should be well
Yes.
versed in walking in them.
Yes.
Mm-mm. My first pageant, the first time I wore those shoes was on that very slippery stage. During the pageant, not even for rehearsals, because I thought I would save them for my big moment. So, that was a mistake. And it was a big learning curve, and now I know that there's so much more. I mean, who outside of pageantry thinks that there's so much more that goes into a walk? And now I know better, and I have incredible coaches who I love working with, and it's fun. It's so fun to just work on the walk and the dress and the interview and filling out your bio sheet, and then you do all of the really tough work, which is why am
Yep.
I here? What do I want this for? What can I bring to the table? And so I think it's a nice mix of the fun and the whimsy of it all, and also the work that goes into it.
I mean, as an actress, you're good at talking. I mean, you have to be unless you're in a silent film. So I'm going to imagine interview, you could deal with interview. But let's just go back to the walk, because it sounds like there's more of a story there. So you'd never worn the heels, which normally
Mm-hmm.
results in actual like blisters, bleeding, slipping over because you're supposed to like and if you have no, like, had you ever walked before? Because it looks like you had no idea. So did you just walk, or like what happened? Tell me more of this story.
So thankfully, because the girls around me were so kind, they said it's a good idea to take something and cut up the bottom of your shoe so it has a
Yeah,
little um,
scuff.
grip, exactly, and so
Yeah.
that you don't slide around on the stage. And I had car keys in my bag backstage. I took them to the bottom of my shoes, and those are still the shoes that I wear to this day. So I've really broken them in by now. And I did that, and then as an actress, I came in thinking, I can do this and I can embody what I think a pageant girl is because
Yeah.
I'm an actress. So I walked how I thought a pageant girl would walk, and I watched it back and was mortified. And I posed how I went to one walking clinic, I will say that.
Okay.
And she taught us some common pageant poses, and I'm grateful for that, because otherwise I don't know what I would have done at the end of the stage. And I did that. But you know what? I had a great time. And I think I went in with such little expectation for myself,
Yeah.
because that first one, I just wanted to know what the experience was like. And so I got that. So there was no pressure to succeed or do well or have the best walk. And I just wanted to feel it. And I had a great time.
I really want to watch this video of you walking for your first time now. I haven't found it, but I will scour the internet for it later.
See, my hope is that you see it and you say, oh, Alexis, that wasn't that bad, but I just don't know if that's true.
Look, I have I say if you come to me for walk coaching, then you've obviously done something horrifically wrong, because I can barely walk as it is. So, you know, walking in heels would be a whole other thing. But let me ask you, because in pageantry, there's advice thrown around very often, like fake it, not even just in pageantry, but fake it till you make it, right? Mm-hmm. And I was always curious as to how an actor, an actress would approach pageantry. Because of that aspect of fake it till you make it, you can go there and you can almost embody someone that you're not. Yet at the same time, in pageantry, you do want to be authentic, because you can hardly be someone completely different. And then if you happen to win, God forbid, then you have to be that fake person for a whole year. But also when it comes to interview, it's like, you may not know exactly what to say, but I like to think, well, you want to practice interview again and again. It's almost like rehearsing your lines until the point where you can riff on it and improvise it. You do want to put some work into it. It's not completely new every time. So I'm just interested, tell me, as an actress, when you got into pageants and you were there for the first time, what was a crossover, I'm interested, between acting and pageantry, if there was any?
Oh, there absolutely was. And I think that's just believe in yourself and go for it. And I think there's a part even in acting where it's you bring yourself to every role, no matter what it is, and no matter how far removed from you it is. You have emotions, and this character has emotions, so you have things in common. And I think, you know, just bringing myself, especially in an interview, I had a great interview coach before. That was the only thing that I had prepared. And she said, these questions are about you. And who knows you better than you? So it's not something that I was worried about. Do I wish that I had more prep beforehand? Yes, I think that, you know, just really knowing what you're getting into can always be helpful and ease the nerves. Because by the time interview came, I was so nervous because I realized I had no idea what I was doing there. But at the end of the day, I knew I was talking about myself and the things that I had been through and my life, and nobody can answer those questions for me. So I think that was helpful. And it all this crosses over in acting, because when I approach a character, it's this character with myself, and I know myself best. And then I'm going to learn this character in the way that I understand them, and then I'm going to approach them that way. So it's just, I think the more you know who you are, and not even what you can bring to the table, but who you are at your core, and you bring that into everything you do, you're going to be fine.
Yeah. It's really interesting for me, particularly hearing you talk about interview, because, I mean, you said you sort of have to know who knows you better than you do. Mm-hmm. But I think that's almost a journey into itself, is a self-awareness. And I'm just wondering whether being a working actress, having been through the highs and lows, whether that helped you know yourself better than a lot of other people do. Because I think in interview, a lot of young women go into it and they don't really have that level of self-awareness because they haven't been asked those really tough questions. You've obviously lived a lot of life in your short life, whether it's a domestic violent relationship, having to leave that, and then being successful, having some level of success, at least as an actress. That must have helped you have a better understanding of who Alexis is.
You would think so. I think when I did my first pageant, I didn't. Right. And it was, I know my story and I can tell you that, but I think even since then, I've had so much growth in myself, and I've learned myself so well from leaving, that relationship and everything that I do. And I think, honestly, I just filled out my judge's bio sheet the other day, which is why I keep bringing that up. But every time you look on paper, it kind of, I don't want to say it tells you who you are, but it's reflective of everything that you've done, and you can draw from that. And so I'm going to be so honest with you, and I think by pursuing pageants, I've learned who I am because I had to, and I had to know what I can bring to the table and the things that I've done and how that has changed me as a person. And I think that nothing else in my life has made me look into myself as much as pageantry.
Yeah.
And so that's probably one of the greatest things that have come from it for me.
Let me ask you a typical interview question then.
Okay.
Having just filled out your bio sheet, no
Uh-huh.
pressure on this. You don't need to answer it like a page, but I'm interested because you just filled out that sheet. How would you describe yourself in 3 words? Like one or two, three key qualities for yourself? Because you've lived a lot of life, as I said.
I
What are
have.
the 3 things that to yourself stand out about yourself?
I am resilient. Like I've told you earlier, I have been knocked down so many times through acting, through being in a relationship marked by domestic violence, and I will always get back up. And I think that that's one of my favorite qualities about myself. I will always rebuild and strive for more, and I am so resilient, and I take such pride in that. I'm also ambitious, coming from a small town in Connecticut and knowing nothing, and people saying you won't make it in Hollywood, and then I came in. I don't want to say that I've made it. I think that for myself and my own goals, I have so much further to go, but I'm on my way there, and that feels incredible. And also, I started pageants, and I think that in itself takes ambition. And I'm kind, and I lead with kindness, and I genuinely want to see the best in other people. I want to lift them up, and I think in sharing my story and how it has changed me, it is going to do that.
You answered that like a pro, Alexis. Well,
Thank you.
well done, right there. Can I smooth segue back to acting just for a second? Do you
Sure.
have any particular inspirations or role models when it comes to acting?
That's hard to say because there are people whose careers I admire, but I think when I had really started to pursue acting professionally, I kind of had to let go of that because
Right.
nobody's career is reflective of somebody else's career. Everybody has their own path in. I really do believe that the right roles for you, you will book when it is your time. And so I kind of had to get rid of everybody else and just focus on myself. And so I don't know, I'm not my own inspiration as an actress, but I think just pulling from my own life is the
Yeah.
thing that is propelling me the most. And like you said, I've lived a lot of life, which I'm grateful that I've grown so much because of, and I utilize that to approach my acting. So I had to let go of having role models because when I did, it wasn't lining up with my life, and it was never going
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. You've already said that you're ambitious, and I think everyone can see that. So I'm curious for yourself, if you take everything that you're doing, where would you like to see yourself in let's say a year from now, or maybe 5 years from now? I think 10 years is too far into the future for an actress. Who knows? But maybe a year from now or 2 years
Mm-hmm.
from now, where would you like to see yourself with everything that you've got going on at the moment?
Oh, well, I would love to be a former title holder as Miss California, United States 2025. And I want to use that to further share my story and grow my platform and utilize it to uh, improve my nonprofit and give back that way. So I think that's something that's a huge goal of mine, and we could see in the 1 to 5 year time span. And as an actress, I would love to be a series regular on an HBO show, and I love indie films. So if I could star in something that went to Sundance or an indie film festival, that is one of my biggest goals in life. And it's hard to put timelines on those because you don't know that
Yeah.
that could happen tomorrow or it could happen in 5 years, but that's a goal that I'm constantly chasing.
Yeah. I know that I asked you about the role models. Have you given any thought to who's someone that you would die to work against or work opposite, like work with as an actor?
Oh, I don't know. I really don't, because Eddie Redmayne I love, and he's one of my favorite actors, and there's so many. But I think again, for me to keep my sanity in this industry, I kind of had to let go of all very specific expectations in order to just go and pursue every opportunity that comes my way. And maybe as my career grows, I will set those markers. But I did have a lot of letting go to do, and that's been the only thing that has let me pursue it for this long.
Sure. Maintaining your sanity is quite important, I would imagine, in the industry that you're in. How do you relax? I mean, you got so much going on. Do you ever relax? I mean, how do you unwind?
I like sports, and I'm athletic. So sometimes I'll play soccer, and you could find me on a rec soccer team in Hollywood. I recently am on hiatus because I have a pageant coming up, and every time I play soccer, I get so bruised, and I don't want to be in this beautiful gown that I love and then have bruises all up and down my legs. But I love doing that. I have a dog named Rudy who is not near, or I would show you him. And I like, hanging out with him, or we'll go take a walk, or dance. I danced a lot as a kid, and I just started that again in the past year or so. And I find so much happiness in it that I'm not where I want to be with that either, but it's something that makes me happy. And so that's what I'm trying to focus on. But I think just moving my body and staying active is what I find relaxing.
I coached tennis. I was a head tennis coach at a girls' school for about 10 years. And I have to say, the sport that produced the most injuries was by far soccer. Every single person I knew who had played soccer had either a very severe knee injury or had completely done their ACL. And they were hobbling around like old women, but they loved it so much that they still wanted to keep doing it. So I don't know what it is about soccer, but it seems to produce a lot of injuries.
I agree.
Just before we get to the final 10, and actually as an actor, I have a different question for you, but just before we get to the final 10, do you have anyone that you want to give a shout out to or thank you to, whether it's, family, friends who've supported you, directors, coaches, things like that?
Oh, everybody. You should have told me. I would have written a list and been prepared for this.
Yeah, here's your moment. And if you don't answer quickly enough, we're going to play you off stage.
The music starts. I want to thank, now I feel like this is an Oscar speech. I want to thank my family and my friends and my acting coaches and my pageant coaches, Tara Rice and Carrie Volan. You have been so supportive of my journey, and you have helped build me into who I am today, and I can't thank you enough for that. And my dog Rudy, of course, because he's by my side every step of the way.
Can I just say, I love how you did well with that. You look like you're. Oh my god! I love how excited you are about life. That's very refreshing. You genuinely look like you're looking forward to life and enjoying that. And I think that's something that all of us could have a bit more of. Now, the final 10 questions, just as an actor, I want to ask you, are you aware of the show Inside the Actors Studio?
Yes.
Okay, so my final 10 questions are his final 10 questions with one change. So just because most people don't know, they think I came up with these questions. I said, no, I stole them from Inside the Actors Studio. But anyway.
Well, I've never practiced them, so this is still fresh.
Here's your moment. All right, so number 1, what is your favorite word?
That's 2 words. Nice. I was gonna. I like when people are nice. I like when things are nice. And it just seemed like a good answer at the time. Next question.
What is your least favorite word?
I was just gonna say bad. Anything that's bad is just you don't want that. Except for Bad Thoughts, which is my series on Netflix. And
that was so smooth. Well done. I was about to give you a hard time for your vocabulary, but then you segued into the promo. So that was well done.
Thanks.
All right. In life, what gets you excited, or what turns you on?
Hope and potential, and not knowing what's coming in the future, and being able to cultivate that yourself.
What turns you off?
Meanness, whether that's to yourself or seeing it in other people or experiencing it and feeling stuck and hopeless. And no situation is ever hopeless, but that's something that you need to find in yourself.
What sound or noise do you love?
Rain outside my bedroom window on a Sunday morning, because then you get to be a little lazy and stay in bed a little longer.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Snoring. I look, I'm a sleeper to my core. I need sleep. I'm not one of those people who could, the people who say,
Yeah.
"Oh, I function on little sleep." I don't. So if there is anything that is keeping me awake in the night, I know that I'm going to have a very rough next day. And so snoring and we don't get along.
Do you snore?
I don't, which is
Okay.
good. Otherwise, I'd be a hypocrite.
I was going to ask if you have. Have you ever woken yourself up with your snoring? Because that happens too. Number 7. If you could have any one superpower, what would you pick and why?
Ooh, I was gonna say reading people's thoughts, but I don't think that I want to know them. So I'm gonna retract that and go with flying because it just seems fun and freeing, and like I could travel so much. I love travel. I've been to 4 countries. I'm a citizen of Portugal, and I want to travel a lot more. So flying seems like it would make it very easy.
That was a fun random fact. Citizen of Portugal, just throwing that in there. I thought
Uh-huh.
you were going to take the chance about, reading people's thoughts to put another promo in for your Netflix show. Number 8, what job other than your own would you most like to attempt?
I would like to be a school teacher. I think that they're so impactful to like we were talking about earlier, the next generation. I love kids. I think that they're exciting and so full of life that I think that that's something that would make me really happy.
What job other than your own would you definitely not like to attempt?
Being a nurse. My mother is a nurse. I have all the respect in the world for her. She has so much empathy. She cares about her patients so much, and she is changing lives every day. But I can't handle blood. So it would not be my job.
What happens when you see blood, just out of interest?
I start to faint. So I remember once I was little, and I have a younger brother, and he cut his finger. And, my mom's a nurse, and she was taking care of it. And I go into the kitchen because I hear yelling and crying and, what's going on? So I go into the kitchen and I say, "What's happening?" And I make eye contact with the cut on his finger. And I go, "Oh, I need to lie down." So then my mom had to mend my brother and then myself. So I'm just not cut out for that occupation.
What it is recently, but out of the 4 or 5 interviews I've done recently, 3 of you have now answered the exact same thing. It's blood, and specifically, if you see it, you will pass out. And I just had this hilarious image. If I just show up in front of you and there's blood, 3 of you are just going to be directly on the floor. One of the Bailey, she cut herself in the shower shaving, and she passed out in the shower.
Oh, that's
So
mad. Wow.
I don't know what's going on here.
I
But
don't know
anyway,
either.
final question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You did great. I'm so proud of you. And you've impacted a lot of people.
Well, I'm
That's
sure you
exactly
have.
what I want to hear. Thank you.
I'm sure you have, and I'm sure you will continue to do so. Well, Alexis, it's been fun. Thanks for jumping on, and thanks for your time, and best of luck with everything. I look forward to seeing you on the big screen sometime soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And thanks to everyone for watching, and we will speak to you next time.